Good evening, Cherries fans, and welcome to this very special show here on Up the Cherries in All Departments. Now, before I do welcome on my special guest, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, of course, transfer deadline day. It's the most exciting time of the year because, especially, we always waiting up quite late to see who comes through the door, and we weren't let down this time round. After quite a slow start in the window, things did pick up in the past couple of days. We made a total of 6 signings. Could have even been a seventh as well. Of course, there is only one man that we can talk to about transfer deadline day. Of course, he reports on it for Sky Sports News as well. He was at the Vitality during the whole deadline day sagas that was happening. He had his finger on the pulse. The only man you need to listen to about transfers. It is a pleasure to welcome onto the show again, Mark McAdam. Good evening, Mark. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Great to see you, Craig.
And to you as well. And we've just come out of the most exciting time of the year for you. You're always very, very busy. We did try and organise this show a little bit earlier in the window, but of course it just got a bit crazy at the end, didn't it?
Yeah, no, it's completely my fault. So a big apology to you. You've been very patient with me, but every time we had something in the diary, 100% of the time, I had to cancel it because this window was unlike any other that I've been involved with. It was absolutely manic, but they didn't have a lot. There wasn't a lot going on, but it felt like there was a lot going on. And you had a mad couple of days at the end, a mad couple of days at the beginning, and then this big malaise in the middle where not very much was happening between clubs. And you're sort of thinking, well, what's going on here? But constantly there was rumours, there was phone calls, there was things going on. So it was one of those situations where you sort of go into bed at night and think, well, nothing's happened today, but I feel like clubs have signed 100 players. So yeah, it was a window to remember for various reasons. But I'm pleased, like normal, that it's over now, thankfully.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, we was quite chuffed that you're on now rather than a little bit earlier because of the sort of players that we brought in as well. So what we'll do is we'll run through some of the players that did come in and also the ones that we missed out on. So early on in the window, and something that you remember quite well, we was linked with Weston McKennie. Of course, Juventus eventually ended up at Leeds. Quite a high figure as well on there. What did you make of that? And what was there any truth in the background of it?
So that was a story that came to us really early on, actually reported by Sky Italy and a guy called Gianluca Damasio, who's quite a well-respected, well-informed journalist. And of course, Bournemouth are interested in good players. Bournemouth are interested in signing players that can improve the team. The problem is, and Bournemouth are more than aware of this, is that not all players will want to join Bournemouth because it's not the big sexy name in the Premier League. So there are certain players that they'd love to have, Zaniolo, for example, who we'll probably talk about later on. But they also aren't silly, and they realise that some of these players won't want to join Bournemouth because it doesn't have a 50,000-seater stadium. It doesn't have a long-standing history of playing in the top flight in England. It can't pay £150,000 a week in wages. And Weston McKennie kind of fit into that. As far as I'm aware, there was an interest in him, but no bids, no serious conversation about, coming to the football club. But that was one of those that kind of pricked up the ears of Bournemouth fans. And naturally, because Bill Foley took over the football club in November, December, you've got a new billionaire owner that's come out publicly and said he wants to support the manager. He wants to bring new players in. He wants to spend. And suddenly Bournemouth became, a target like Newcastle did after their takeover and like other football clubs have become. So it was one of those things where you look at it and you think, oh, here we go. Is this what this window is going to be like? But that was a player, whilst the club liked him, I didn't think there was a lot of substance towards actually signing him.
Was you surprised when he did eventually go to Leeds at the end of the window?
I was surprised he went to Leeds. I wasn't surprised he came to the Premier League. Unfortunately for clubs in La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A, Ligue 1, they're financially cash-strapped, apart from PSG. They really have been hit massively by the pandemic, by COVID, and they're struggling to, recover really. And it's going to take some time for them to do that. So they all need to sell a player or two every single window just to keep things ticking over without putting themselves in a massive financial black hole. So, he was a player that was of interest to a couple of Premier League sides, but it was Leeds that pulled the trigger and decided to get him in. So it'd be interesting to see how he gets on, how he adapts, and whether it might be one of those where you look back and go, well, maybe the club should have pushed to try and get him. Or you might say, well, actually, it just wasn't in our remit because of the money that was involved.
And of course, we do all have to work to a budget as well. And all football clubs are going to have a budget. And to be honest, that would have been a sizable amount, really, on one player when we need to strengthen a lot of areas of the team. Would you agree?
Yeah, that would have been a big chunk. I didn't get told a figure. In the back of my mind, I thought Bournemouth might spend between 40 and 60 million in the January transfer window, providing the players that were being targeted were available at the right prices. And of course, that would have blown the whole budget out the water. And that's something the club hasn't really ever done. They've always stuck to their principles. They've always tried to get players between that kind of £5 and £15 million mark. Occasionally, they'll go over that when they find someone who they think suitable. But they're always very conscious and sensible with the money. And I think that's kind of continued into this window, essentially. They've still wanted, whilst there's a new owner who wants to invest and wants to strengthen the side, I still think they've been very cautious with the money that they've spent on certain players, and they've been prepared to walk away, which is something that's really impressed me in this window, is that they've not just pursued a player and paid over the odds. They've gone to what they feel he's worth. If the deal hasn't been agreed, they've walked away and moved on to another target. And I think that's always impressive, and that shows a depth in the recruitment department. So, it's I think it's been a good, effective and sensible window. But like you say, spending that kind of money on one player is not what Bournemouth's remit was about. They wanted to strengthen in a number of areas, and that meant that they had to, be sensible with the money they spent.
And of course, one player that we did bring in, and he was the first player through the door, was Dango Atara. Now, there was a lot of controversy between fans of Lorient when this happened, because, of course, Bill Foley had recently purchased a share in Lorient. And I can understand the frustrations from their football club, but also, like you say, all clubs in the French league, Italian league, Spanish league, all need to sell players to keep themselves going. And Atara, of course, we saw him against Nottingham Forest, was an exciting prospect, very, very young, around about the 20 million mark. What did you make of the rumours of other players joining from Lorient, like Terem Moffi and also Enzo Laffi?
Yeah, so in terms of Terham, Moffat, I don't think there was ever really an interest from Bournemouth in the player, despite what was being said in the media. And the same with Lafay. I think they really liked him, but they were just aware that that wasn't a deal that was going to happen. I think Dongo was the player that they targeted. He was the one that they felt could add something. He was the one that brought something a little bit different in terms of the profile he has compared to the other wingers that are currently at the football club. So I think there was so much made about Bournemouth cherry picking all of the best players from Lorient. And quite simply, that just wasn't the case. They were, of course, interested in one player, and they take note of the good players. But I think Bournemouth would have bought one player from Lorient in this window, regardless of the situation with Bill Foley. If he was the owner, the part owner, or nothing to do with the football club, I still think the player was a target. So, yeah, I get the frustrations of Lorient fans. It doesn't look great, but that's football. You lose your best players. That's the nature of the beast. And in order for these clubs to continue to turn and improve and invest, they have to sell players. I think other than perhaps, maybe Real Madrid, at a PSG, Man United, there's not many teams that can hold on to players without needing to sell. But every single club needs to sell players to generate income. You saw it with Liverpool, with Sadio Mane. You've seen it with, 2 or 3 players that have left Chelsea. This is the business. You buy low, sell high. And if you buy high, you try and sell high to regain as much of your money back. That's just the industry we're in. No one wants to see a player come in and leave on a free transfer because it just doesn't make business sense.
And he does look an exciting prospect, Dongo, because I always call him Dango Atara. It's actually Dongo Atara, is it?
I've been told it's Dongo. So
Dongo. Normally
one of the first things you do when anyone signs a new player is how do you pronounce his name? Because you don't want to get it wrong. Yeah. I've been told it's Dongo Watara. So, but again, when he first joined, I was calling him Dango Watara. So it's part of the fun of it. But yeah, Dongo Watara is how he has been, described to us as how we should pronounce his name. So but he's young, he's exciting, very raw. Like I said, a very different type of profile to the other players that we have at the club in those positions. I think you've seen a little flash of what he's about against Nottingham Forest. He's only a young lad, so he's going to make mistakes. He's going to take time. This is something that's really important to remember in this window, and the players that we have signed. They're all coming from abroad other than Darren and Anton. So this is new for them. They're moving to a new country. They're speaking a new language. They're working in a different environment. They're living in a new house or hotel or whatever it is for the time being. And they've got to go into a training ground and learn about a new club's philosophy and DNA and what the manager wants you to do and stuff. So sometimes they'll adapt to it really quickly. Sometimes it will take a bit of time. And I think that's really important for this particular group, that there's a little bit of awareness from the fan base and a little bit of patience, because there will be mistakes made. There will be games where things don't go to plan. But this is a group of young players, new signings, and hopefully they can gel together quickly and they can show what they're about. But someone described Dongo to me as a really exciting player that has masses of potential. He said Premier League might be a step too far at this stage, but in the Championship, he feels like he could be a key player for Bournemouth. Hopefully, they don't need him in the Championship. Yeah. But if they go down and they've got an asset at that level that can fire them back up again, then that would say to me sensible business.
Yeah, most definitely. Before we come on to the goalkeeper who we bought in, of course, there was the rumour about Arnaut Danjuma. And everybody got really excited, of course, when Danjuma was here last. We was in lockdown. I don't think he really saw the appreciation, but he could probably see it on social media how much he was loved by this football club. Of course, he did have a bit part to play in the Premier League under Eddie. But it was all very, very strange. It looked like we was in the driving seat. And then there was the move to Everton, which completely threw me. I was shocked by that. And then, of course, he went to Spurs, which I was quite pleased about, considering I thought Everton was a done deal. How did that even map out?
Well, this is the thing about transfers, and this is the nightmare of being a transfer reporter, because you can only put out to the public the information you know. The information you know was only accurate the moment you got told it. So if you were told something at 10 o'clock and you put it out at 11, in that hour, things can change and change quickly. And that's quite simply how football transfers work. Now, were Bournemouth interested in Arnaut Danjuma? 100%. Did they present to him the best package they possibly could? Yes. Did they want to make him the highest paid player in the club's history? Yes. Did they roll out the red carpet and do everything they possibly could to say, come back to Bournemouth? We love you. We want you. We know your value. They absolutely did. And I can sit back, and I think the board could sit back and go, we did everything we could. You know, we couldn't convince him, and we couldn't have done anything differently. He just chose to go to another club. And that's the way these things work in football sometimes. I think Arnaut Danjuma maybe thought that, you know, coming from Villarreal, being in the Champions League Team of the Year, being the player he thinks he is and has a right to think, you know, of his own value, he wanted a bigger club and, you know, put himself on the map at a bigger ground in front of a bigger fan base. Hence why he chose Everton. There was interest from Crystal Palace. There was interest from Southampton. There was rumoured interest from Leicester. I don't think Aston Villa were ever really at the table, despite what people were saying in the media. And obviously, Tottenham were lurking in and around the background, but didn't make their interest known until very, very late. And essentially, it got down to Bournemouth or Everton. And the reason I think there was a bit of an uncertainty from his perspective because of the Frank Lampard situation. He'd heard a rumour that Frank Lampard was going to be sacked, and he wasn't quite sure what that would do for him. You know, when you sign for a manager and suddenly they get sacked, you just don't know what's going to happen with your future. So I think that just made everything a little bit nervous. Of course, the key game was West Ham Everton that weekend, and inevitably, whoever lost the match was going to be under huge pressure for their job, whether it's David Moyes or Frank Lampard. And so he quite crucially didn't sign the paperwork. I'm led to believe he did the media, did the photograph with the scarf and the shirt and everything. He was at the training ground, but just didn't sign the paperwork. So all of that means nothing until the lines, you know, the signatures on the dotted line, and it wasn't. And then Tottenham made their interest known last minute. His agent said, you know, don't sign anything, don't do anything. We're headed down to London, and the rest is history. And that's the way these things work. I've been at football clubs on deadline days where you've had players come through the door and you've got a shot at them, and you've shook their hand and you said hello, and they've gone off to do their medical, and the medical's been completed. And then for whatever reason, you know, things have changed. And the same for, you know, I've been told of players that are driving down to the Vitality for a medical, or driving down to Brighton for a medical, and they've done a U-turn on the M40 and decided to go to another club because they've had a phone call, they've had a change of heart. You're going to get an extra 10 grand a week. So actually, yeah, I'm going to join somewhere else. And that's just the nature of these things. So, Arnaut Danjuma, so close, but so far.
And with all the Everton transfer, there was this rumour going round that Danjuma wasn't or wouldn't have liked playing under David Moyes. And that was one of the fears, was Lampard gets sacked, Moyes goes into Everton again.
Yeah.
Was there any rumour at all, the truth in that rumour at all?
Well, that was the rumour that was doing the rounds, and that's what I've been told as well. You know, only Arnaut Danjuma would know, you know, if that's one of the reasons why he decided not to sign that contract that he'd agreed. It turns out that David Moyes wasn't going to be the new Everton manager. So, you know, you could say, well, that was just fabricated, you know, rumours from social media, and there was never any substance to it, because Sean Dyche is now the Everton manager. But I'm pretty certain that, you know, Arnaut would say that the uncertainty over Frank's position was a reason why he didn't sign. So yeah, I think it's kind of 50% true, that one.
Of course, there was Darren Randolph, who joined the club from West Ham, and personally, I saw this as very, very good business. Of course, Neto has just come back from injury. Travers, has played well, but I think still needs to get his confidence up. And I think this was a sensible move by the club to get somebody as backup to Neto. And was there ever a possibility that with Randolph coming in, that Travers was going to go out on loan somewhere else?
I don't think so. I'd never been told of any interest in Mark Travers or any interest in the football club to let him go. Gary O'Neill actually spoke about it in today's press conference. I was down at the Vitality Stadium earlier today, and he sort of said, look, you know, when Neto was injured and Mark was in, and he had a couple of doubts over a couple of minor injuries, we had Cameron playing on the bench. And whilst Cameron's a good young goalkeeper, you don't want to be chucking him into Premier League competition. Because that's unfair on the lad, it's unfair on the team. And, you know, if you get relegated because a goalkeeper makes a couple of mistakes, it could be incredibly costly for the football club. So it just makes sense to have 3 good quality goalkeepers to provide competition and people that you can rely on. And with Neto being in and out the side because of injury, because of Mark Travers being concerned about a couple of things, it just made sense. So there's been an interest in Darren Randolph for some time. I know that he's a player that the club's been keeping tabs on. He's a great character, great personality, hugely experienced as well. So I think he'll come into that group and he'll definitely add something. Even if he doesn't start games or play games, I think he'll definitely bring something to the dressing room. And I think that's going to be vital for the second phase of the season.
Do you think that he will be brought in as number 2, or do you think if there is an injury to Neto, touchwood that doesn't happen, that Travers may still be effectively number 2, Randolph number 3? How do you think that might work?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know how that will work. It's up to Gary O'Neill. That's you know, and obviously Neil Moss. That's why they're in those positions of power to make those big decisions. I think you know, obviously Mark Travers was an incredible player for Bournemouth last season in the campaign where they got promoted from the Championship. I don't think he's played at his best this season. He's obviously had a bit of a run of games and he's come out the team, gone in the team, come out the team. So it's been a little bit stop-start. And if you even spoke to him about, you know, how he feels his form has been, probably would say I've not been as good as I'd have liked to have been this season. So I think there's just genuine competition now. I think you've got 3 really good goalkeepers. I'd probably say that Neto was the number 1, but you know, Darren might have had a conversation with Gary and you know, I said, I want to be a number 1. I want to come and play week in, week out. And Gary might say, well, yeah, that's why I'm bringing you in, because I think you're good enough for that. So who knows? It's going to be one of those ones to wait and see what happens this weekend.
And one player that we were very, very close to signing, he had the medical and unfortunately failed it, was Nicholas Jackson. Now, I saw a bit of footage of Jackson playing for Villarreal, and he looked and made things look easy. He looks a very exciting player, a good forward. What was the issues with that transfer, and why did it all fall through in the end?
So basically, Nicholas Jackson was a player, of course, the club had been monitoring for some time. There was interest there and they were willing to pay the kind of money that Sevilla were looking for. And but when they did the negotiations, they knew that there was an injury to his hamstring, I believe. And they kind of said, well, let's forget about the injury at the moment. We still like the player. We still want the player. They were told, I think, that the injury wasn't very serious. It was only going to be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks. He'd be back, you know, soon enough and nothing to worry about. But the club, rightly so, did their due diligence. They got, you know, extra assessments. They got different opinions from doctors. They did more scans. They did a really thorough medical, which is exactly what you should do. If you're spending £25 million on a player, you should be checking every single thing to do with his medical history and to make sure that you're buying what you think you're buying and that everything's going to be okay. So that was the situation. They got reports from different doctors. They collated that information. And then, of course, they had a decision to make. Is this the right thing to do with for the football club? The player is going to be out for a lot longer than they anticipated. Sort of, I think it was more 7-8 weeks instead of 2 or 3. And if you suddenly go, right, we're not going to get this player in training until the beginning of April, if it takes him 2 to 3 weeks to get match sharp, then, you know, you're not going to see him until the end of April, beginning of May, which is too late. So why would you invest that kind of money? So it's a shame for the lad, a shame for Bournemouth, because obviously they put a lot of work into that deal. But he knew, they knew the situation. They knew everything about the lad, and they knew the situation. And it was just one of those things. They got to that point where they were like, right, let's just be sure that what we're being told is true and accurate. And, you know, this is the case with injuries. You can never be sure. They say 2 to 3 weeks and they're back within a week. They say 2 to 3 weeks and it takes 6 weeks. That's just the nature of science and these guys' bodies. You know, you can never be 100% sure. So that's why they took their time and got the extra reports done to make sure. So it was one of those. I felt sorry for the lad more so than anything, but this wasn't a situation that caught Bournemouth out. This was a situation that they were fully aware of, and they just decided in the end it wasn't the right thing to do for the football club.
Of course, he was linked with Southampton as well. Do you think the football club will go back in for him if we do survive in the Premier League this season? Do you think we'll go back in for Jackson? Or do you think that Southampton are still going to have and renew their interest?
Who knows? Who knows? A lot can happen between now and the end of the season. You know, both Bournemouth could still and Southampton could be in the Premier League. Both teams could be in the Championship, one up, one down. You just don't know. And of course, you know, you might find that, you know, Dom Solanke scores 10 goals in the second phase of the season. And, you know, the other players that they've signed, Anton Semenyo, might knock in some goals. The wingers might score goals. And suddenly Bournemouth go, actually, we don't need to strengthen in that area because all the players that we've got in those positions are playing really effectively, scoring goals and coming up with assists. So therefore, we want to strengthen at right back, or we want to strengthen at centre half, or we want another holding midfielder. So, yeah, it's difficult to say what you think may or may not happen in the summer. But I think they'll certainly monitor the player and see how he gets on and see how he develops. And when he comes back from his injury, you know, how does he play? He could score 10 goals in the second half of the season, and then his price goes from 35 to 50, from 25 to 50. He could score no goals, and his price goes from 25 to 17. That's the great thing about transfers. You can never, ever, ever predict it.
And of course, you mentioned there Anton Semenyo, who we signed from Bristol City. And he was a player that when we signed him, you know, a bit like Marcus Tavernier, you know, the transfer didn't really excite me. However, you know, he's done a decent job this season at Bristol City. And like Marcus Tavernier, hopefully, you know, he'll surprise us all and really hit the ground running. What were the reasons you feel that Gary O'Neill invested so much time in bringing Anton to the club?
Well, I think he was a player that was of interest and had been for some time. It's funny because I've watched a lot of Bristol City over the course of the last 12, 18 months. Yeah. And I've watched Anton Semenyo. I have watched Anton be unplayable. Really, really effective. Everything you'd want from a striker. And I've watched him not have his greatest games. So I've seen a real mixed bag of the player myself. I think I've watched Bristol City maybe 7 or 8 times in the last 12 months. So I've seen him live quite a few times. I can absolutely see why the club wanted to get him. He fits the profile of what has been successful for Bournemouth over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. Young, championship player, English domestic recruitment, watch him for a longer period of time, understands English football, and that's where they've been successful doing that. So you can see why they've wanted to go down that route. Unfortunately for clubs like Bournemouth, the championship is not as strong as it used to be. So the players that you know, the likes of Victor Gyökeres at Coventry, Iliman and Ndiaye at Sheffield United, these types of players are almost financially out of reach, you know, because clubs want, you know, 25, 30 million quid for them. And there's no way on earth. And, you know, if I'm the owner of a Premier League side, I'm not giving a championship side 30 million quid for 25 million quid for a player. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So, but I think they had 2 bids knocked back, 8 plus 2, 6 plus 2, 8 plus 2, and then they paid 9 plus 1.5 in the end. I think, forgive me if my memory is not quite accurate on that. But they were prepared to wait and just, you know, and bide their time and see what else became available. And in the end, there was a deal to be done. So, yeah, I think Anton will come with a real passion to prove he can play at the highest level, which is something we've seen in the past. When you've got players that have come from League One and the Championship, they want to prove to everyone that they're Premier League players. And when you've got that fire and that hunger and that desire to prove people wrong or to prove people right, you know, you bring a little bit of extra spice to your game. So hopefully we can see the best of him. Be interesting to see, you know, with Dom Solanke, Kiefer Moore, Anton. That's three big, you know, players that bring a presence up front. And, you know, can you play both of them? If you play both of them, you definitely wouldn't want to be a defender against both of them, against two of those three, because of what they'll bring in terms of the strength and the pace that they bring to the game. But I think it's important that we've got three really strong strikers that can compete and, you know, just bring something hopefully to the attack, because we need to score goals. The second phase of the season, we really need to put teams away. You know, we scored a couple against Leeds and a couple against Spurs and, you know, Everton, and we were scoring goals. We need to get back to being that side that can score 2 or 3 in a game.
And that's what's exciting, actually, about this transfer. When I think about it, Tavernier, of course, signed from Middlesbrough, a Championship player wanting to make his name in the Premier League, and he's done that so far. Unfortunately, he's been out injured, but when he's played, he's looked really, really good, and hopefully Semedo will do exactly the same. I think it's probably time to move on to the craziest transfer rumour, which was Nicolo Zaniolo. I remember when this came out, I tweeted you and I said, I can't believe we're actually even linked to this player. And there was all sorts of rumours doing the circuit, so that we had actually spoken to him and the agent had turned us down. Then he wanted to come to Bournemouth in the end. What was the truth of it all?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I'm trying to think of what I can say that's honest and fair to everyone without completely giving the game away. So, you know, like I said earlier on in the show, Bournemouth want to sign the best players they can, right? Yeah. Would they want to sign Lionel Messi? Of course they would. Will Lionel Messi come to Bournemouth? No. And Nicolo Zaniolo was one of these players. Of course there was an interest there. But they knew that he wouldn't want to come to Bournemouth. You know, this was a player that was once, you know, dubbed the future of Italian football. This is the player that was playing in the Champions League. This was the player that was linked with £60 million moves just 6 months ago in the summer. This was a player that they thought could be the new Francesco Totti at Roma. Yeah. You know, these are the labels that were being attached to the player 12 months ago, 18, 24 months ago. Of course, he's had ACL injuries. He's had serious knee injuries, which has affected his ability to play at the level that he wants. And therefore, he'd been made available by Roma. Whilst Bournemouth were talking to Roma about Vigna, they were having a conversation about, you know, players like they do. Who's available? What have you heard? You know, what players are out there that you think will be good for us, etc., and so on and so on. And Roma basically said, from my understanding, well, if you're interested in Zaniolo, he's available for 30 million euros. And Bournemouth said, we'd pay 30 million euros, but he won't want to come to us. So there's not really much point in pursuing that. And they said, well, why don't you speak to the lad? And I think there was a conversation that was had between the club and his agent. And essentially, yeah, he didn't want to come to Bournemouth. But that was no surprise, because the club knew that he had ideas above Bournemouth. He wanted to play in European football. He wanted to play Champions League. He wanted to be, you know, a big, huge club. So they weren't surprised by that reaction. And they understood it entirely. So it wasn't one of these kind of, you know, situation that, you know, Bournemouth weren't being fantasists by trying to sign a player of this quality. They were interested in the player because they thought he was obviously going to be able to add something to the group. But they were fully aware that, you know, it was a club that he probably wouldn't join. And as is so often the case with a lot of transfers these days, all of this comes out in the media, really, before the lads even had the opportunity to think about it. I think he thought about it. said no initially. And then I think over the course of the weekend, when Bournemouth are attracting really exciting young players, Ilya Zabani, Ahmed Traore, they sign Vinya, his teammate, and one or two others, and you look at the money that's being spent and the fact that there's a new ownership group there and there's a big project and it's exciting. And I think he's probably then thought, well, and then obviously you've got Roma coming out publicly and saying, we're not interested in the player, we want him to go, we've accepted an offer. And Jose saying he's not going to be a part of his plans. I think at some point, Nicolo went, well, actually, is the best thing for me to do to go and play at Bournemouth. But as we've already touched upon today, Craig, the club didn't hang around when Arnaut Danjuma decided to go to Everton, when Nicholas Jackson failed his medical. They moved on to their next target. And in some senses, they might say that the second target or the third target was actually better than their first. You know, often in football, you find that sometimes your initial target, for example, N'Golo Kante, that went to Leicester, he was their third choice for that holding midfield role at Leicester. First two choices they couldn't get. They ended up getting Kante. And guess what happened? He became a superstar of that side at Leicester that won the Premier League, then got his big money move to Chelsea, then went on and won more titles. But he was their third choice. So getting your first, second or third choice, sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise. So Bournemouth went off, spent their money, invested elsewhere. And I think essentially he came back to them on Monday and said, is that offer still available? I'd be interested in talking. And I think Bournemouth had just quite simply got other players, moved on, and it just wasn't meant to be. But real substance to the transfer, and could have happened, but it didn't. So it's one for the scrapbook.
Do you think it could happen in the summer?
Who knows? Who knows? You know, there's no question that there's a quality player there. It would be a huge gamble. It would be a big financial investment. And I think the lad has got his heart set on AC Milan. So there might be a point where he'd wait for, you know, a club like that. Maybe in the summer, the 30 million euros will become 20 million euros. And at which point there may be other, and his wage demands, whatever they are, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
£120,000 a week might suddenly become £80,000 a week. And when you go into £80,000 a week and 20 million euros, there may be a lot more clubs interested in him. So therefore, the chances of Bournemouth revisiting that are probably quite slim, but you never know.
But there's definitely not bad feeling between Zaniolo and the AFC Bournemouth. But I'm guessing that there probably is between Zaniolo and Roma.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think he's endeared himself to the hierarchy or the manager at the football club. So, you know, it's part and parcel of football.
Yeah, definitely. But of course, Roma did allow us to have one of their players, and you did mention Matthias Vinner as well. A left back and somebody who does look very exciting. He is on a loan, but we have got that option to sign him permanently, haven't we, if we like him?
Yeah, 15 million euros is the loan option, I believe. And I think, again, that's really sensible business for the football club. You don't want to spend huge sums of money on buying players when there is a chance you could get relegated. So, and also, you know, you don't want to commit to big money if the player isn't as effective in the Premier League as you'd hope. So I think this suits the club. This is sensible business. Young player, 25. He's got some experience, but still, you know, enough time to learn, grow, and develop. We've been looking really for competition for Jay-Z at left back. Some might say we've been looking for a left back since Charlie Daniels left.
Yeah,
which could also be the case. But yeah, definitely good to have some competition. And I think he'll bring something a little bit different. I don't know a huge amount of detail about the player and his technical qualities, but obviously Richard Hughes is someone that follows Italian football very closely. So I'd be surprised if he didn't have numerous reports on him as a player and what he'd bring, because that's his specialist subject, Italian football. So another player I'm excited about seeing.
Is the transfer deal really based on us staying in the Premier League? Will it happen if, say, for example, the worst did come to the worst?
I don't know. I don't know what would, it might be a situation where he plays really well. And Bournemouth say, look, we want you to stay and you can be our number one left back in the Championship and you'll be a massive part of the team that gets us back up. I'm presuming that, and I'm being presumptuous here because I don't know the intricacies of the contract and the agreement, but I'm presuming that if he is really effective, Bournemouth potentially could buy him with the option at 15 million euros and then sell him immediately for more money and make money on it because they hold the option. But I really don't know the details there. So that's above my pay grade in terms of my knowledge. But I don't think the club always seem to be quite sort of switched on when it comes to negotiating contracts and deals and things. So therefore, we'll have to wait and see what plays out. I just, it depends. If the lad plays really well, that's all we want, really. And if he moves on, then so be it. But if he can be a number one fixture down that left hand side for us and be an important part of the team, then that's the remit, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Well, the next player, of course, that come in was a centre back, and it was a position that I picked out after that Forest game, and also, some weeks beforehand as well. Is an area that we needed somebody in, and I was personally going down the old head route. Somebody a little bit like Sylvain Distin when he was here in 2015-16 and did a job, really. He didn't play as much as, maybe he would have liked, but he did a job. And I've said, well, maybe Steve Cook. But the player we did sign was Ilya Zabarini. I might have said that name wrong. Please do correct me, Mark.
Yeah. I don't know about the pronunciation. Ilya Zabani is what I've been going with, but that could be wrong as well. So hopefully we'll get guided on that one fairly soon so we can all get it right and start practicing it. I don't know how this transfer came about, but I do know that there's been a lot of people messaging me from recruitment and scouting circles and other journalists that cover, Dynamo Kiev, and he is, without question, probably one of the most highly rated centre-backs outside of European, the top 4-5 European leagues. 20 years old. He's played in excess of 20 games in the Champions League already. And considering he's only a youngster, that's incredible. I think he has huge potential. He could be a really exciting player, decent size, athletic, not physically the biggest, but that's something that you will grow and develop into. He's not going to be the brute centre half at the age of 20 years old. I don't think there are many like that. So it's going to take a little bit of time for him to adapt to the physicalities of the Premier League. But yeah, possibly of all the players we've signed, this one might be the one that could be seen as the most exciting, or the player that might generate the most money if we were to sell him. He could be one of those really, really special players. So I'm looking forward. He's got Sean Cooper and Tommy Elphick, two centre halves back in their day to work with him and to learn and guide and push him forward. So I think that's going to be a big part of things. But yeah, I think this could be a really big sign. Again, huge investment from Bill Foley, £24 million. So this is one to definitely watch. And I hope he adapts quickly, settles in, and shows everyone the qualities he has. And he's coming from a difficult place. When you've been in Ukraine and obviously everything that they've been through over the last 9 to 12 months. I hope he comes with the love and support that he deserves, and I think and hope our fan base can show him that compassion and love and support, and he can play his best football at the football club and move forward in that way.
And I'm sure, from what I know of him already, I'm sure that he'll make all Ukrainians proud out there as well. And, hopefully, he'll be a star for us. And, of course, the last player in was Hamid Traore from Sassuolo. player that I didn't know much about, but again, when I had a little bit of a watch of him, looks very, very talented youngster.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he comes from the stable of Serie A players that we've been linked to, looked at, and signed. So I think naturally, as I've already touched upon, Richard Hughes cast his eye on Serie A because of his family connections and history in the game. So therefore, he would have had a good understanding about the player and what he'll bring. And once again, I keep saying young, exciting player, and it's you can see the profile. Historically, the profile has been from championship sides or players in this country. This window has been from players abroad. So again, it's a slightly different backdrop, but someone that has masses of potential, someone that scored goals in Serie A this season. His last game was at the San Siro. So that's not a bad place to have played your last game in Italian football before making the move to the Premier League. So he's got that experience of playing on the big stage. And again, I think he'll just be desperately hungry to prove that he's capable of playing in England's top flight. So, yeah, he was the last deal to get done. That was six players in. So, yeah, I think you look back on deadline day and the window as a whole and go, this has been really effective business by the football club. And certainly on paper, it leaves you excited for what's to come.
Of course, there was a seventh that was in the works. And I was sat there watching Sky Sports News and it kept panning to you in the Vitality and was like, who's this seventh player? I'll be honest, everybody watching, I threw two names that I heard at Mark and they were both completely wrong. So the rumours that I got told were incorrect. But is there any more you can tell us on this?
Do you know what? I was desperate to say, but out of respect to the player, and of course he's got a club that he's playing at now. It'd be unfair to sort of tell people that he was on the verge of a deadline day move because he's still got a season to go. So I wouldn't want to be unfair, but everyone keeps saying, it was just saying this. It was just to keep everyone watching and keep everyone up late at night. No, it was a genuine seventh player. They tried to get something in. It looked like it was going to happen at one stage. And then only, when the deadline closes and you ask the club and the press team what deal sheets are still outstanding and they say none, then you realise that it just didn't happen. But genuinely, right up until 11 o'clock on Tuesday night, I thought that there was a really strong chance that the deal would happen. And one day it will probably come out who it was, and fans will either be excited or frustrated or disappointed or happy that it didn't work out. But it was one of those. But you could write a book on players that nearly moved to other clubs on deadline day and it didn't happen. It's just part and parcel of football. But yeah, I promise you, I absolutely promise you, there was a seventh player, and it isn't someone whose name had come out in the media.
And that's why we love transfer deadline day, because it just seems to go a little bit crazy at the end. But yeah, I was waiting and watching. I kept getting these rumours coming through, especially the two names that I mentioned earlier on to you, Mark. But neither of those were correct, so nobody knows. It's a mystery. Of course, we did let a couple of players go as well. Well, quite a few players, really, Mark. And what I'll do is I'll go through these. Of course, Macondes, he returned to Norseland on loan. And I always feel it's a bit of a shame for Macondes because, he's such a dedicated, loyal pro. He's a absolutely lovely guy. I've met him on a number of occasions. Lovely guy, so down to earth. Do you think we've probably seen the last of him in the Bournemouth shirt?
Possibly. Never say never. But yeah, I totally echo what you've said. Every time I've interviewed him or met him, spent time with him, Emmy's been top class. Really decent, friendly guy. And it just didn't work out. He just didn't get the game time that perhaps he deserved. The team evolved quite quickly in that spell from when he came in to when Scott Parker came in and took control, and the other players that became available, and things just just happened, and that's often the way in football. But yeah, I think he'll, despite not playing a lot of games, was a real fan's favourite. And yeah, you never know. You never know. You never say never in football. So I wouldn't be surprised if he played again. But maybe that is his time at Bournemouth. Officially at an end.
And it's a real shame that, but I do wish him the very, very best if that is the scenario that happens. Of course, Jamal Lowe has gone on loan to QPR, and actually this is quite a nice loan for him, of course, to the Championship. It's a level that he's good at. It's a level he did well for us at. But he's never really been able to make that bridge to the Premier League, really, since his Swansea days.
No. And he'll probably say that if he had more minutes, then he would have been able to prove to people what he was capable of. But yeah, he was a great player in so many ways for Bournemouth. Just didn't quite show the quality perhaps he possesses. I watched him a lot when he was at Portsmouth, and he was outstanding. Really, really good, effective player. He got his move to the Championship from League One. He's done really well in times for various clubs that he's played at. He was at QPR as a young lad, got released when I think he was in the under-14s. And now he's back there. I watched him make his full debut for the club last week against... I can't think who it was now. I do too many games. That's my problem. It's gone into my brain since those days. But Swansea, there you go.
Swansea, there you are.
Yeah, Swansea. So he took his goal really well. He had hit the bar and had another chance. He should have scored a hat trick. But I think he'll do really well at Queen's Park Rangers. I think he's back home in London where he wants to be. I think it's a great club, great people around it, and I think he could have a really strong second half to the season and show that he's still capable of scoring goals. So yeah, sorry to see Jamal go, but completely understand the mechanics of the transfer because he wasn't getting game time, and of course we can't have players that are earning money sitting on the bench, not doing a lot, or sitting in the stands. So makes sense, that one.
There was another frustrating one as well that I saw, and Kilkenny, of course, he was recalled from Stoke. He only played 3 games for them, and has now been sent on loan to Charlton. I don't understand why it's not worked out for him at Stoke, because he did a good job in the Championship last time round. But do you think League One, he should be able to tear that league apart, shouldn't he?
I think, he should be one of the best midfielders in League One, without question. Yeah. You speak to anyone at Bournemouth about Gav and his qualities, and they'll say, he is one of the best, midfielders that does that role that the club has. Everyone speaks so highly of him. He's a great lad, great character. It did surprise me, of course, the Stoke thing. Probably Michael O'Neill brought him in. Then he got sacked. Then Alex Neil comes in, and new manager doesn't fancy certain players. And therefore his game time's been limited. He had agreed a season-long loan at Stoke, so there had to be a negotiation between Stoke and Charlton to kind of facilitate that deal. But yeah, I think under the new manager Dean Holden at Bristol at Charlton, I think he'll be a really good signing for them, and I think he should be one of the more dominant midfielders in League One.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, we'll come on to the last 2 because those were on deadline day. But James Hill, a centre-back, does look like he's going to become a good player. He had a very, very good game for Hearts the other day. Was a little bit surprised why he didn't go on loan to the Championship. But was there a reason why he went to Scotland, which... To be fair, apart from Rangers and Celtic, you could say those 2 are, very, very strong teams. But a lot of the sides in that Scottish league are probably akin to League One, League Two sides.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I can only presume that there were no Championship sides that were interested in him. I haven't really had that conversation. Often is the case with transfers. You're so worried about players coming in, you don't always get the time to ask about the ones going out. And therefore, obviously, I think he's playing in a decent side at the moment. and he'll have big games against Celtic and Rangers, which will give him a massive level of experience. I still think he has a future at Bournemouth. I think they brought him in as for a reason. He again fitted that old profile that we had, young domestic UK based recruitment. And I think he could be someone that potentially is a big fixture for the seasons to come. So, yeah, I think game time's key. Just play matches, especially when you're young. You just need to play games. You need to get experience. And, I think he'll come back to Bournemouth a much more rounded, better player. And depending on which division they're in, he could find himself as a key part of things moving forward.
And the two that left on deadline day, of course, Ben Pearson and Shriki Dembele. Dembele, a player that I've got a lot of time for, and I was surprised considering the Lorient link. He went to Auxerre.
Yeah, I don't know the intricacies of this one again. I watched Shriki Dembele tear it up in League One at Peterborough. He frightened defenders by just being on the team sheet, because he had a pace to burn and the ability to drive with the ball and take you up the pitch, score goals, set goals up, and just be a real nuisance. And again, he's another one that perhaps has not got the game time that he feels like he probably deserved. Maybe didn't take the opportunities that he got given. When you're an attacking player, you come on and you score a goal. You show everyone your pace and show what you're about. And I just don't think I ever saw him do what we know he can do. But of course, it was a League One to the Championship to the Premier League transition that happened, in the space of 6 months. He went from being in League One to the Premier League, and that's a big jump. Auxerre obviously was a club that came in for him, and he was interested in there. So I think you can understand that opportunity, somewhere different, a new opportunity, a new club, a different environment, and I'm sure he'll walk away, with a much more rounded experience of football and come back a much better player.
Yeah, definitely. And, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see him in a Bournemouth shirt again, because he is a player that I do really rate. But, of course, we've discussed our side. Who do you reckon had the best and the worst window in January?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you can never judge a transfer window on paper, which is what we do now. We look at the players that went to various clubs, and then you say, well, they've had the best window, or they've had the best window, or, so on and so forth. I think the players that Forest signed are, quite amazing yet again. Spending more money, attracting big names, paying big wages. They've got a real mix of quality and talent there. I think they were good. Again, I like what Arsenal have done. They've spent a lot of time giving new contracts out to players. I like what Newcastle did with Harrison Ashby. He's a player I've liked for some time, and Anthony Gordon is a player that Eddie Howe and his recruitment team have been tracking for a number of years. From under 18s. So he's finally got his man. Obviously, I like what I'm intrigued by what Chelsea are doing. I wouldn't say I like what Chelsea are doing. The fact that they're signing the best young talents from around Europe is exciting. I feel sorry for all of their academy players, their 23 players, because Chelsea have the best academy in the country, and as we've seen recently, have developed some incredible talents. Fikayo Tomori, Reece James, Mason Mount, Conor Gallagher, and so on and so forth. And these players now will be shuffled down the pecking order, and the opportunities to get into the first team will become few and far between. So, whilst you look at the players they've signed, you're not quite sure about the whole process and the money that gets spent. But that's their model. That's what they wanted to do. So you have to, it's within the rules at the moment. So they've done that. But I think, you will only know if these players are good or bad when you get to the end of the season and you look at who's had an impact and who hasn't, and who's done well and who hasn't, and whatnot. And that's the thing about transfers. Every single transfer, whether you're Chelsea paying 120 million euros for Enzo Fernandez, or you're Bournemouth spending 9 million on Antoine Semenyo or Dongo Ouattara, you are gambling with the club's money. every single transfer. You never have a transfer that is guaranteed to pay off. So therefore, you just have to judge those players on what happens. And I think really there's only two ways you judge transfers. They either get into the first team and play a huge number of games for the club that they signed for, or you sell them on and make a profit on them. And generally, those are the two things that judge whether a transfer has been good or bad. If a player is a bit part player, then you'd say, well, it wasn't a good transfer. You want to sign players that go straight into the first team, play week in, week out, add to the dynamic of the game and the match and the history of the club, and then move on in their own time or get sold to raise huge funds for the club. And you'll never know until you get to one of those 2 points.
And one club that has, and of course we're playing them this weekend, Brighton have done incredibly well when you look at it. I think 125 million in player sales. They've spent, I believe, about 46 million. Is it as impressive as it looks?
I think Brighton's recruitment is really impressive. I always look at what they do. I always look at what Brentford do, because they're two clubs that use data and metrics to sign players. And basically, without going into the details of it, they have huge databases of players and what they do and how many sprints they make, how many times they give the ball away, how many crosses they put into the box, how many times they cross it with the first touch, how many touches and they basically will look at data and use that as a big tool to sign players and recruit players. And you have to be amazed at what has happened at these respective clubs with regards to the players they've signed, the profits they've made. Brighton have done an incredible job of it, but at some stage they will, find, that the player that they thought they were bringing in isn't ready for that opportunity. Is Cucurella been a good signing for Chelsea? Probably not. £62.5 million. So therefore, that was one that you might argue Chelsea got wrong, Brighton got right. Just what they've done, the money they've made has been incredible. Tony Bloom is a very wise and shrewd businessman, very experienced, very knowledgeable. The assistant vice chairman, or whatever his title is, Paul Barber, is another vastly experienced football man. Dan Ashworth was there. Paul Winstanley was there. Dean McCauley was there, but Dean and Paul Winstanley have moved on. Dan Ashworth has moved on. So the heartbeat of that Brighton setup is now gone. However, one of Tony Bloom's biggest things is succession planning. He always, whether it's the tea lady or the guy that cleans the toilets, or whether it's the sporting director, there is always someone that's being trained up in the background to replace them. David Weir is that man at Brighton now. He's jumped into the hot seat. So therefore, he'll take on the mantle of what they're doing. So, Paul Winstanley's gone as well. He's gone to Chelsea. Dean McCauley went with Graham Potter to Chelsea. So, they've got to sort of rejuvenate that backroom team themselves. And I think this is where, the transfers moving forward are the ones that you keep an eye on, because the ones that are currently in the first team or the ones that have been signed recently are all a part of that process that's been in place. Now you're going to start to see the new people put their stamp on things.
And the last two clubs I wanted to touch on with you, Mark, is the two teams directly below us. Let's start with Southampton, because, of course, you was covering them on transfer deadline day. What did you make of their transfer activity?
Well, obviously, in the summer, I thought it was a really exciting project. Young players, some of the best young players in the country. I think of the 11 players they signed in the summer, 6 of them were under the age of 21. So that gives you an indication as to the types of characters and profiles that they were looking at. But, plumb bottom of the league. And I take no pride in saying that, Southampton bottom of the league. But clearly the project, wasn't right. They didn't get a striker in, and that was a big miss for them. They needed an out-and-out goal scorer. Ralph Hasenhüttl was desperate for a goal scorer. He didn't get one, and surprise, surprise, they struggled. And this is the thing: it's fine to bring in young players, But young players need experienced players around them to guide them through moments in games and to educate them and to tell them what to do and not what, and what not to do during certain matches and certain situations. So I always think it's nice to have that philosophy of young players, but you still need to have a sprinkling of experience around that group to take them to the next level. That was something that Nathan Jones has added in this window. Players like Orsic have been around the block and back again. He'll bring a lot of experience. And in deadline day itself, they signed a couple of players and spent around £14 million as well. So I would say it's been another progressive, decent window for Southampton. They're under huge pressure. They're out of the League Cup now, thanks to our old friends at Newcastle.
Yeah.
So they've got one focus and one focus only, and that's survival in the Premier League. But form hasn't been good in the Prem. So Nathan Jones, under huge pressure, has got to start getting some performances out of this young side. But just to caveat everything I've said there, the youngest average starting 11 in the Premier League belongs to Arsenal. Arsenal, top of the league. Yep. The second average starting 11 belongs to Southampton, bottom of the league. So you've got the most two extremes there. Southampton at the bottom, Arsenal at the top, both with young squads. I just think the Arsenal project is 2 or 3 seasons more advanced than the Southampton one.
And of course, we need to bring up Everton as well, who are a bit of a crisis club at the moment. Of course, they were beaten by Southampton. Their fans were chasing cars through the street. It was ugly scenes. There's a real hatred towards their owners. They sold Anthony Gordon to Newcastle. Looked like they were going to get somebody in. Got nobody.
Yeah, that's the way these things work. I think I have to be honest. I'm not entirely surprised that Everton signed no one, because they are really struggling financially. The owners and the people that are involved with the club, the shareholders, have invested a huge sum of money over the last few years. They've built a new training ground. They're trying to build a new stadium. They've got a lot of transfers wrong. They spend a lot on big wages on players that perhaps aren't worth it. And of course, the turnaround in managers continually going from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And, and they've just been caught out in this situation. So whilst I'm not surprised they didn't spend any money, because they don't have any money to spend. I do feel a little bit for Sean Dyche that he didn't get maybe one body through the door that just could have added something to that group. But he's got to work with what he's got. I think on paper they certainly have enough quality to stay in the division. I think they have a manager that knows how to firefight, knows how to keep a side in the top flight under limited resources and a budget. I'm pretty certain that Sean Dyche would have known that there would have been very little money to spend in January when he took the job. But of course, he would have been willing to take the job anyway. So, it's certainly, if Everton went and invested that 40 million they got from Anthony Gordon into 2 or 3 players, got Arnaud Danjuma, then I think I'd be sat here very, very worried, because you need to find 3 teams weaker than you. Everton potentially could be one of those sides. So therefore, that's one of the 3 that we need to ensure that we stay in the top flight. But that's just the way these things go. And of course, as Bournemouth know, as Southampton know, sometimes it's difficult to attract players to a club that isn't in the best place, is in the bottom 3, is struggling. The fan base are unhappy. It looks a little bit disjointed. And when you're getting players, confronted after games and chased down the street, why would you want to go and play for Everton? Huge club, incredible fan base, hugely passionate fan base. And even now, when you see the bus turn up to matches and you see the blue flares in and around the streets of Goodison Park, and it fills you with excitement about the passion they have for their club. And that's something I absolutely adore. But sometimes, West Ham have been relegated recently. Fulham have been relegated recently. And look what's happened now. They go down, they come back up, and they're stronger for it. And maybe that might be the best thing for Everton, a bit of a hard reset, get rid of some of those high earners out the way, and then build again to come back and be more stable and better in the Premier League in the years to come.
We definitely don't want to be going into that final game of the season at Goodison with something riding on it, do we, though?
No, definitely not. I'd love to be safe by then.
Yeah.
But that said, if you get, if someone says to you now, you can have Premier League survival in your own hands on the last day of the season, then you take that. You don't want to be relegated by the end of the season. But if you can go into that game knowing a win keeps you in the Prem, then I'd take that scenario right now all day long.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll all be done and dusted by then, and we'll be going to Everton just for a little bit of a day out. They might not enjoy it as much as we will, but that's the dream scenario. We don't want to even think about the other one. But Mark, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I'm sure you'll be around the grounds and on Sky Sports Soccer Saturday as well.
Yeah, no, it's all busy. I'm looking forward to the second phase of the season. We're probably about sort of 6 weeks away from the sort of the business end where it really starts to get exciting. I couldn't be more thrilled about the business that Bournemouth have done in this window. I'm really excited about the team that Gary's got at his disposal. I think now we need to, as a fan base, I've seen a lot of negativity and I've seen a lot of rudeness and I've seen a lot of just nastiness and nasty comments about, the manager or the players or the board or whatever. And, that's not what Bournemouth's about. Bournemouth is a community club. It's, a small club in the bigger picture of the Premier League. It's had the most incredible journey over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. And the club's motto is together, anything is possible. And everything I've seen recently on social media has been anything but together. Mm-hmm. Now, I think if you're going to judge Gary O'Neill when he's got, young lads on the bench that have never played in the Premier League before, because the likes of Neto and Solanke and Billing and Tavernier and the first 11 are all out, then what hope's he got? So I think I just want to see an awareness from the fan base. I want to see a togetherness from the fan base. Let's get behind the manager. Let's get behind this young group. Let's see what we can achieve. Let's give him the chance. If things aren't going well in 10 games time, then of course you've got the right to voice your opinion, but do it in a respectful way. Gary O'Neill and the team want to win every game. They want to be successful. They want to create the best environment for this club, and they want to play the most exciting, attractive football. And I just think people need to get into perspective the size of the club, the start of the project, where we're going, what we're doing. And I know it's been on my chest for a little while, and I've seen some really hurtful things that's really bothered me, because that's not what Bournemouth is about. Bournemouth is a good, friendly, family, community club that is built upon, the donations of the fans and the support of the fans and the togetherness of the fans. And I think it's important we don't lose that. And I'm so excited about this next part of the season. If we can get a couple of wins, I'd be a lot more excited and just get ourselves away from the bottom three. But, I think, this should be a time that we can all enjoy it together.
Yeah, most definitely. And I echo everything you said there, because I have been the person probably most continuously behind Gary O'Neill in our fan base. And, an absolutely lovely guy. I had the pleasure of actually sitting down with Gary, and he's so astute. He's so dedicated to his work. He's studying teams inside out, and he just doesn't deserve, the grief that he's been put through. And neither do the players, neither do Neil Blake and Richard Hughes, who, if you look at what they've done, they're not going to get it right every single time. But at the same time, what they have got right is fantastic throughout the years. And they were strong. They supported Eddie through thick and thin. And, I think we're very lucky as a football club. The other alternative is, of course, what we was subject to years and years and years ago, which was players not getting paid. The club in a complete mess.
I was there as a member of staff. Didn't get paid my wages. I think in the final final 12 months of my time as a full-time employee at Bournemouth, I got paid in full on time 3 times in 12 months. You know, would Bill Foley buy a football club that wasn't financially stable? No. Would Bill Foley buy a football club that had loads of debt? No. Would Bill Foley and Michael B. Jordan, you know, a Hollywood actor, be interested in Bournemouth if it was not being run properly? No, they wouldn't. But they have invested in this. We, you know, I've said it so many times. You speak to Stoke fans, you speak to Huddersfield fans, you speak to Swansea fans, you speak to these types of clubs that have all gone down and not come back up again because they've not been run properly. You know, obviously, you know, they sold £80 million worth of player when we got relegated. They balanced the books. They kept the club afloat. They kept it stabilised. They've done everything they possibly can and do everything they possibly can to make sure the club is sustainable and sensible, and it spends wisely and it does what's right. And therefore, you can't have a go at, you know, these people because they're trying to do the best for the club. You know, do they want Bournemouth to finish in the top 10 every year? Of course they do. Do they want to make loads of money from player sales? Of course they do. You know, does anyone actually think that they're doing a bad job on purpose? You've got a really good partnership there. Neil and Richard, who have been working together for a number of years. And I don't get to spend as much time with them as I'd like because they're busy guys. You know, I don't have that opportunity. But I'm pretty certain from the small dealings I've had with them over the years that they have the interests of that club at heart, and they are desperate to see it succeed. But again, let's just, you know, and hey, if we get relegated and the new players aren't very successful and Gary O'Neill doesn't do a good job, then the fans have got a right to be upset. But there's a way about being upset and disappointed, and there's a line that you don't cross. And I just think right now, this is where we come together, and this is what we show as a fan base, the qualities that we have to get behind this young team that could be the start of a really exciting adventure.
Yep, completely agree, Mark. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again, mate.
And my pleasure.
No doubt we'll catch up later on in the season.
Definitely. No, I look forward to it, Craig.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Mark. All the best. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this show. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here at the Cherries in all departments. Please do check out Mark's previous videos, which he was speaking about Bill Foley's takeover and, of course, Gary O'Neill's appointment as well. We've got loads and loads of content coming up, so do hit the subscribe button, the bell button, and everything else, like buttons on all videos as well. That's always nice. And do check out Cherries Extra as well. It is a very small little sub channel, very raw videos, to be fair. They will be recorded from anywhere. They won't have the intro and the outro on them, but of course they have content which you might find interesting, and it's just off the top of our heads half the time, so do check out that channel and hit the subscribe one on there as well. Until the next show, thank you for joining us, and fingers crossed for 3 points at the Amex. Up the Cherries.